Hello and welcome to Cymera, Britain's only book festival celebrating science fiction, fantasy and horror writing. My name is Anne Landman and I'm the festival's founder and artistic director. Right about now, I'd hope to be welcoming you to beautiful Edinburgh, to our venue The Pleasance, for a weekend packed with events. Writing workshop, panels, readings, open mics, a quiz, a ceilidh, 2 plays. We had so much in store for you. Thank you for joining us online instead, to be part of our programme from the safety of your homes. We're very excited to still bring you a fantastic lineup of speakers. We'd ask you that you support our speakers, and there's many ways you can do that. You can buy their books or borrow them from the library. You can donate to them directly via their Patreon or Ko-fi. You will find the links for that below in the description. We encourage you to buy a ticket for our events, even the pre-recorded ones. All ticket money will go directly to our speakers. You can also donate to the festival, and all donations via the donation page will be split between our speakers, once we've covered our costs like the Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us in this brave new world of digital events. We hope you have a chance to check out all 33 of ours over the weekend. Please let us know what you think of them. Do get in touch via social media, the chat function in Zoom, or drop us an email on info@chimerafestival.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in person next year for Cymera 2021.
Hi and welcome to Cymera Festival. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Eleanor Pender and I have the great pleasure of being joined by both Mark Alder and Rod Duncan this afternoon. Feel free to, to wave. Just wanted to go over how this event is going to take place for the next hour or so. It's about 15 minutes long. What we're going to do is I'm going to introduce both our writers, and they're going to give us a bit of a snapshot of their wonderful worlds, and then we're basically just going to have a bit of a chat and see where our our conversations take us this afternoon. Two brilliant worlds that we're actually going to be able to explore. So just to give everyone a bit of some background, if anyone is completely new to Mark and Rod today, Mark Alder has many names. He goes by also journalist Mark Barrowcliff. Wanted to make sure I got the right surname there in my notes. A one-time stand-up comedian. Yep. Is that right? Yeah. Yep. Mark is also the author of mainstream fiction and non-fiction, and you also write for a variety of different publications. You have written the internationally acclaimed Wolf Angel novels under the pseudonym M.D. Loughlin. Yeah. Son of the Night is the second book in a new fantasy series and publishes Gallants, and today we are talking about The Devil's Blade. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add to that wonderful biography there, Mark? Any other mysterious... Any other names? Any other books?
Well, I'm thinking of a little extra one at the moment, something I'm doing at the moment, which may go out under a different name. But whenever I always have this thing, whenever I say anything, I make a hard and fast rule. It always comes back to bite me. So once, literally about 15 years ago, I said, never trust anyone with a lot of pseudonyms. And then I end up with a lot of pseudonyms myself very quickly. So
okay. That's like yes. The minute you say it out loud, then someone asks you later on if that one that actually is gonna happen. Rod Duncan writes alternate history, fantasy, and contemporary crime. His novels have been shortlisted for the Philip K. Dick novel, the East Midlands Book Award, and the John Creasy Dagger of the Crime Writers Association. Any other awards I may have missed there, Rod, or is that?
Being sort of shortlisted is my usual thing. I never make the final step, but yeah, those are the main shortlistings.
Yeah, it's a lovely selection. You lecture in creative writing. I say crime writing, creative writing at De Montfort University. I have this line here. Some might say that he is obsessed with boundary markers, native 18th century gravestones, and forming friendships with crows.
Some might, but I couldn't possibly comment.
Great. So how... You couldn't possibly comment. Mystery. Very nice. So welcome, both of you, to Cymera, to this digital space. How are you both doing?
Well, the university is moving all our teaching potentially towards distance teaching and learning, and that means we have to redesign everything. So that has been almost all my time over the last month or two has been spent thinking about that. So yeah, that's been my lockdown experience really so far.
Yeah, it's nothing different for me really. It's how I live my life. Normally, the only thing is I live right in the centre of Brighton, and everything's closed down, so it's much quieter. I mean, in some ways, you know, I hate to say it, but in some ways, I've kind of, it seems a saner pace of life that we have under this than we had before. So yeah, we're doing fine here.
It does feel a bit slower, and I think for some of us that's no bad thing. Lovely. So what I think would be good next is for one of you to introduce you to your work and to your worlds. Who? Does anyone particularly like to go first?
Well, volunteers
okay,
take one step back.
I've got Queen of All Crows in front of me.
I've got one of those.
Very lovely series. You've got one of those? I think you might have more than me. Rod, would you kindly introduce us to what you have done, to what you've changed to the world for Queen of All Crows, especially people are completely new to your writing?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here and lovely to be speaking to everyone. This kind of weird bit of my life started about 6 or 7 years ago when I wrote the Bullet Catcher's Daughter, which was the Philip K. Dick Award shortlisted novel. And that kind of set up this alternate history and introduced the character who I'm going to read a little bit from in a moment. And that was followed by Unseemly Science and then The Custodian of Marvels. And these books, as you say, they're set in an alternate history, one in which there has been a small change about 200 years ago, which has led progressively to larger and larger changes, the sort of domino fall of geopolitical changes. And from that initial thing, we have a Luddite-inspired British Revolutionary War, which forms a new republic, the Anglo-Scottish Republic, and begins this kind of major change. And that republic joins with other new republics in America and France, and begins forming the kind of nucleus of what will become a world encircling alliance of nations constructed under a kind of Luddite ideal of helping the ordinary people supposedly helping the ordinary people by holding back the wild horses of science and technology. And so we arrive in the 21st century, and societal change has kind of stagnated in a kind of gaslit Victorian-esque sort of society. And there's been this long period of quiet, which they call the Long Quiet. And it's kind of like ideas of the end of history that people were talking about in the 1990s when the Iron Curtain had come down and the Soviet Union had fallen, and people were saying quite complacently, I think, that the way everything was going to be liberal democracy now, because once people had arrived at that, they would never go back. And it was a kind of complacent view. And what I'm interested in these novels is how such a kind of long period of stasis can be challenged and may actually be threatened. So that's the kind of the introduction to the alternate history. And so I thought I just, if it's okay, just read you a very, very short piece that happens at the beginning of the Queen of All Crows, which is the beginning of the second trilogy, which kind of sets up the themes of history and the way history might change. And then I'll just read you one tiny little bit from the voice of Elizabeth, who's our main protagonist, from another book. But this is just a very short piece, prologue, and it's the sad history of the airship American Frontier. For passengers on the AS American Frontier at a cruising altitude of 8,000 feet, the moment the world changed was preceded by a vision of beauty, the shadow of their airship fleeting over moonlit cloud. Here and there, the dark surface of the Atlantic was revealed in breaks between the white. From one such break came flashes like distant lightning. Passengers looked down in wonder through the cabin windows as bright streaks lanced up towards them. It was only when they heard the scream of bullets that panic set in. Impacts clattered against the engine and rear compartment. Then came the thuds of fatter, slower projectiles ripping into the canopy. The great machine tilted and began to fall. Every loose thing slid or tumbled towards the rear of the carriages. Smoke poured from the engines as they battled the inevitable pull of gravity. From a distance, the end seemed slow, dreadfully slow, yet magnificent. In the vast span of the civilized world, no gun existed that could have brought down an airship from such a height, and it was inconceivable that one could have been manufactured in the chaos that lay beyond, yet it happened and the world changed. Some would later argue that the downing of the American Frontier proved history to be a tide that no one could hold back. Others would cite it as evidence that change comes chaotically through the sparking genius of great minds afterwards. So that's the beginning of this trilogy, and the beginning of the Queen of All Crows. And just very briefly, so here's the next one, which was I can't even remember the titles myself now. There's too many of them. The Outlaw. And
the Upstart King.
Yeah, well done. Outlaw and the Upstart King. And then the one that's out this year, which is The Fugitive and the Vanishing Man. And I'm just going to, because I can't really introduce these books without introducing you to Elizabeth, who's the protagonist, who is the character who really has made the whole thing happen. And so just very briefly, a little passage where she's trying to negotiate her escape from Niagara in North America, and she's trying to negotiate a passage on a boat in the early hours of the morning before dawn. She's on the quay and she's talking to the boat captain on the boat. "I need help," she whispered, gripping her pistol hidden within the pocket of the coat. It wasn't loaded, but if it came to trouble, they wouldn't know. "I need to get away from here. I've got money." "You're in trouble." "They're forcing me to marry," she said, hoping it sounded plausible. Niagara was a place for weddings, after all. "Who's forcing you?" "My uncle and aunt." "You don't love him, then?" She shook her head. He scratched his. "I'm an orphan," she said, not knowing if it was true. He ran his tongue over his lips. He was calculating, sure enough, as was she. Her palm felt sweaty against the pistol stock. "Where are you bound?" she asked. "Cleveland." "Where's that?" She was giving away her ignorance, but needed to know if it was east or west. His eyes narrowed. "You talk funny, like a queen or something. Where's home to you?" "London, but I'm no queen. My people are shopkeepers." "Well, Cleveland's 2 days west of here, but we don't take passengers." From the look on the boy's face, she could tell it was a lie. "I can pay, but you'd have to leave early." "Leaving early would cost extra." $20 is all I have." "That's the very price." He held out his hand, palm upwards. She didn't move. "How quickly can you get the boiler up to pressure?" He scratched at his chin as if beginning to suspect that she was more than she seemed. 3 hours. "Do it in 2 and I'll pay double." you said 20 was all you had, and you said you don't take passengers. So that's Elizabeth, and those are the books.
I liked that passage actually. It's quite good when you see Elizabeth. She's like, when she susses people out, it's like, oh, she's a smart one. I like her a lot. Before we move into the Devil's Blade, just to stay with the map of unknown things is the name of the full trilogy. I just wanted to. You say you've taken a particular point in history, and then you've kind of redirected that industrial development. And I suppose just before we're introduced to the Devil's Blade, was that something you'd always thought of doing? Were you a student of classic Victorian literature, as so many of us are? I mean, what was your starting point when it came to you for the Bullet Catcher's Daughter, where it all started?
My starting point was the city of Leicester, which is kind of just outside the window here. It may look as if I'm in Oregon, at Crown Point in Oregon, and I put this kind of backdrop up here because... Yes,
I know why you've got that backdrop up there.
Yeah, because if you read The Fugitive and the Vanishing Man, then you'll know there's a castle that sits right at the top of that hill.
So that's a real castle?
It's not a real castle, it's a real place.
Oh, okay. It's a real place. Okay.
That's the great thing about being a writer. You can put any building you want anywhere you want. So yeah, Leicester. Leicester's a city in the English Midlands, and it's a city that a lot of the built architecture was dates from the end of the Victorian era and into the kind of the first 10, 15 years of the age that followed. And if you kind of living here, you get a sense of that Victorian presence wherever you go, and it's kind of just below the surface. So if you get a little narrow street, somewhere, and the frost maybe breaks up the road surface in the winter, you can see the cobbles underneath, under just that little skim of asphalt. There are cobblestones, and you can see the polish on the upper surface of those stones. And you know that comes from kind of hobnail boots and iron wagon rims, wheel rims, and passing over it over years and years and years. And it's kind of everywhere. And I having lived here for a period of time, I wanted to somehow bring it back in a story so that it was here now at the same time as being in the modern age, but that was somehow still here. That's not a kind of rational explanation, it's more of an emotional explanation. So the initial idea for the branching point on this alternate history came from just that kind of emotional response to the built environment here. And so I kind of constructed what I thought was a plausible path to that still being here now. And then my initial idea had been to write a series of short stories set in that setting, but the first short story I embarked on just kind of spiraled out of control into that sort of novelist's rhythm, that you start to tell the story in the rhythm of a novel, and it's never going to fit in a short story. But then I didn't know that it was going to be 6 novels.
Yeah, there comes a point where that plot appears, and then the characters then decide to kind of take over a little bit, and you realize it's not under your control. We have so much to talk about. Mark, please tell us about the Devil's Blade and the Brilliant Julie and everything that takes place.
Sure. Well, I sort of come at alternate history from a slightly different way. What I tend to do is make a very small change to the world. So in my previous series, The Banners of Blood, and in fact in the Wolf's Angel series as well that I've written, all I do, the only change I make, is I take the mythology of the day seriously. So in the Viking stuff, the Wolf's Angel series, gods do walk the earth and intervene, and gods do sort of pop up as sort of in human form all the time and all the rest of it. In the Banners of Blood, kings do talk to angels, angels intercede on the behalf of kings, devils walk the earth, and in that series, which was much more serious than The Devil's Blade, when I say serious, I kind of had more. I'll come to the Devil's Blade in a minute. I had more ideas, all the rest of it.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and in that series, I kind of came up with the idea that if God sets the hierarchy, if God says the rich and the nobles are here and the poor here, well, if you want to upend that, who do you turn to? And I came up with the cult of Luciferianism and all this kind of thing, which I later found out was true. I wrote this cult, which turned out to actually exist in the 14th century, which is absolutely, whether I'd read it and just absorbed it years ago and regurgitated it, I don't know. And that was all based on kind of Gnosticism, and Satan becomes two people in that, two separate people, one on the side of God. Because what people always ignore about the Bible, which is what you see in the Devil's Blade, is that the devil is on God's side. That's that seems to be the enormous overarching theme of Christianity to me, is that since the Black Plague anyway, is that the devil does God's work. The devil punishes the sinners. So there's no difference between those two. So I came up with a different devil, Lucifer, who made the world, made Eden and all this kind of thing, was much more sort of egalitarian, and Satan was this jailer. In the Devil's Blade, we have none of that sort of detailed cosmology. It's a romp. It is the Three Musketeers. It's swashbuckling. I forgot to have anybody swing off a candelabra, a chandelier kind of thing, but I will if we get to next novel on it. And the only difference in this is it takes the Catholic idea that you can pay for the remission of sins, which was around at the time, and takes it completely literally. And so what we have is the world of the imagined 17th century of Cymera, which is where I took all this kind of stuff from, with this the character of the devil thrown in, and Julie Daubney, who was a real life opera singer who killed 11 men in duels. And how the book came about was, I thought, well, why did she kill those 11 men? Can I come up with a reason she would have killed all 11? And I upped it to 13, and that's when she falls out with this devil worshipping society who cross her, and then she has to go and kill them one by one. But it's also based, the whole idea is also based on a real life duelist, a separate duelist who was a man, who would hold people an excellent duelist. He'd disarm his opponent, put them on the floor, put his sword to their neck, and say, "Renounce God, and I will spare you." And the guy renounces God, and then he kills him, and because he wanted to do him body and soul. And that's why the book says she will have her revenge in this world and the next, because she's not just interested in killing you; she wants to make sure you go to hell. And that's the problem that she faces throughout, is because these guys keep repenting and keep paying money to the clergy for remission, and she has to get them in a state of sin. So that's the difficulty for her. But Julie was a real life person who was utterly remarkable in every way. You know, opera singer, duelist, lover of the aristocracy, friends of Louis XIV brother Monsieur. A very interesting woman.
Fantastic. It really is a romp. I do think that's the best way to describe it. You can tell that you've had great fun.
You've got time, I can read a bit. But
yes, I mean, if you'd like to be able to transport us to you're quite detailed and very atmospheric Paris of
the bit, because I wanted to choose a short bit, we don't actually see Julie in this bit. We just hear someone talk about her, who you will find out who it is talking about her at the end of the book. So this is, it begins Paris, 1687, Prelude, Nocturne, and the whole book is done as an opera. It's in acts, and it has scenes and all the rest of it. They say the devil made her, but I know better. She told me all her stories, and I witnessed a few. Yes, I remember the night it began. I remember the night it ended too, but I'll tell that tale another time. I had become interested in a certain group of gentlemen of great quality, and had heard they were planning to meet by midnight on All Hallows Eve in the Bois de Boulogne, that deep, dark wood that leaks from the western edge of Paris like a pool of blood from a vanquished duelist's side. Now, this was the time of King Louis XIV, the Sun King, who very rightly spent his reign ignoring the poor and raising monuments to his own splendour. Neither he nor his police force under the baleful rule of Monsieur de Lorraine were interested at all in what happened beneath those trees, so long as it did not involve fomenting insurrection. It would have taken a brave revolutionary or a lusty one to visit the Bois at night, thronging as it was with whores and thieves and any other whose business proceeds better unseen. A man took his life in his hands to go there, and no woman of virtue would set foot beneath the trees, which was the point of these gentlemen choosing it for their little rendezvous, I think. These great men, you see, were lovers of frisson, of the charge that ignites the senses when mild danger is near, of pushing the edges of experience, of daring to do what others would not. I'll cut a bit out here because it's going to be a bit long otherwise. So, let me not present her in a dry tale told in this tawdry way. I may not have the enthusiasm to describe the clinging fog, the church torches in their veils of light, the deep smell of the horses, the wet autumn mud that encroached on the fine footwear of those gentlemen and threatened their pale stockings. I have nothing but enthusiasm for describing her. I will show you her here, nervous and flushed, as she steps from the coach that has delivered her to the woods. She rearranges her skirts as she steps down, feels the cloth of the skirt to try to adjust a stray garter. She has to fight her instinct to simply lift up the dress and secure the garter herself. High men might be close. She needs to watch her manners. I'll cut yet another bit out because it'll make it a bit shorter. Let's. Of course, she would not have gone willingly into the woods, but she's been looking out of the windows for reasons. She's not been looking out of the windows for reasons that will later emerge. She has no sense of what she might become. This girl of 16. She has not taken the grand name they will howl through their tears as they lower her coffin down into the dead earth. 2 or 3 times as it happens. She was never very good at staying dead. For now, she's plain old Julie Daubney, who has been panting by the door of the Grand Opera in Paris for a month in the hope of an audition. Her voice may be wonderful, but that is not enough. She needs introductions, presentation, the right people to speak for her. You might think, given her upbringing in Alsace as the daughter of the secretary of the Comte d'Armagnac, she would find such contacts easy to come by. But a secretary is a functionary, a tradesman really, and though the Comte might entrust the education of his sons and other pages to such a man, he would not speak to them beyond business. So Julia's paid her way in the world by singing in the street, where she came to the notice of the Band of 13, the Black Tredicime, as they call themselves, in order, one presumes, to show they know Latin and are gentlemen. She was flattered when they invited her to sing for them. Such rich men, so much poise, so much refinement. Julie thinks these are men of influence. She is right. She thinks they might do her some good, get her the audition she seeks. She is dead wrong. But let me go on and tell this tale in the way she would have liked, as a drama, as an opera. Here, by torchlight, Act 1, enter Julian Pavel, her lover, in a carriage. That's how it is, isn't it?
It really just set the scene really well, and I liked the way that you'd actually set it up like an opera, where you had the acts. And oddly, there are acts in yours as well, Rod. Obviously, working to a slightly different format, but we can come to that as well. So I just wanted to ask you a question, Mark, about the setting. I mean, I appreciate that there are different parts of France that come into play over the course of The Devil's Blade, but Paris is the main setting. And the Paris that most people know, the romantic capital that everyone has come to love very dearly. But you obviously had to immerse yourself into the Paris of this particular time period.
Yeah.
And you bring it to life very, very well. Particularly with the streets and obviously the fact that it's not pavement or even cobbles, as Rod said before. There's it's very much even before that particular time, and it's the smells and the textures. How did you bring that to life? Did you have to do a lot of research to make it?
I just read a couple of books on it, and there are certain sort of evocative things you get. I mean, the police kept having to give orders in the Paris of that time to clean the streets because people were in danger of sinking up to their thighs in horse manure, human excrement, mud, whatever. And certain areas of Paris, Saint-Germain area, you could smell before you arrived in them. And this is, again, it's not Haussmann's Paris. This is a sort of packed, clinging, sort of warren of streets and and smells and chaos, really. Yeah, this is where we the ferment of the French Revolution isn't too far away.
Yeah, ferment's a good word, actually. It's bubbling away. Really.
Yeah, well, it was a little bit like that, I think.
Yeah. I have a whole list of questions going on here. Where to start? So with that particular part of Paris history, for both of you, it's coming up to the French Revolution with the Devil's Blade, and with Rod, we mentioned earlier about that point within, we can all recognise points within certain cities within England, that sign of progress, that movement towards progress. And I was struck by both characters, both Julie and Elizabeth, making observations about progress and what that actually means in terms of humanity and what it actually meant to be human. And I wondered, how did you perceive the point in history that you both wrote from as a particular turning point? I realised that Devil's Blade is slightly different in terms of the fact that Rod's made a complete turning point and a stronger alternative history. But did both of you kind of wish the world had taken a different course? I don't know if that with the Devil's Blade, we could all be swordsmen. It'd be great.
Well,
Swashbuckling adventure.
Yeah, there's again the Devil's Blade is. I've written several sort of novels of ideas maybe, or of certain sort of influenced by myth. But as I say, more or less serious books. So I would,
they're very serious books, Mark.
But well, there's a bit of comedy in as well. But the Devil's Blade isn't really a serious book, and it's a bit of fun. So
yeah.
I suppose. It's set in the Enlightenment, but what you have got the sense of is just an underclass, or not even an underclass, a middle class full of boiling talent, which is being sat on by the ancien regime. Sat on by the nobility. These people are going nowhere.
You've got that recurring theme of, but you haven't got your letters of introduction, and it's like,
Yeah. You're nothing without, or you're nothing without them. And so you can see a little bit of that. But the world of the Devil's Blade probably did carry on really. But there's, as I say, it's a book that is designed as an adventure story and a romp, and a little bit like. Maybe Kill Bill with rapier, well, not rapiers, but small swords. But it's not.
Would you say Kill Bill meets Count of Monte Cristo without the prison bit?
that kind of thing.
I do like Count of Monte Cristo. Rod, what about you?
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to inhabit the world that I've created.
You don't want to live in the gaslit empire after you.
Well, I've constructed it in what I hope is a deliberate. It's deliberate anyway. I hope it's an ambiguous way, and that there are aspects of it that are actually good, and there are aspects of it that are awful, and we've had this sort of geopolitical quiescence over this long period of time, and also a technological quiescence, and that has kind of together they have had a stagnation of social progress, and so whereas the architects of that world, fondly imagine they've arrived at some ideal society, there are whole sections of society who are very much left out of that, and obviously gender is a big issue through the books, and that's one of the parameters, but obviously wealth as well, and in one of the books, immigration status, and so So there, and I suppose I'm interested in the way that the big changing points, the big turning points in history, seem to me often there is an influence of people who are outsiders in that, people who are cannot be satisfied with the setup as it is, and kind of will be the first ones to see the flaws in the society they have, and may actually be people who can through their actions make a difference. And I was really struck at, you know, when the Berlin Wall came down, there was, it seemed to be in some ways precipitated by the acts of individual Berliners, individual Germans who travelled up to a different place on the border, where the guards wouldn't shoot them if they crossed. And first of all, a few went and climbed over the wall there, and over the fences there, and then it was more, and then it was more, and then within a few days there were huge floods of people doing this, and you know, this was very much instrumental, it seems to me, in the actual precipitation of the moment when the Berlin Wall came down, because all it took was a place where the guards weren't prepared to shoot people crossing, and the whole edifice went. And so it was the people who were most driven to make that journey who would not have been the success stories, the comfortable people within the society. And so that's the kind of thing that interests me. So no, I've set up a society I would not want to be in, because it's very much non-ideal, and I think I would be not comfortable in it.
Yeah. Given both of your answers, I think a question on you both really do look at power and social standing, obviously in very different ways. You know, those who rule and those who make the rules. Obviously, we've touched upon how much fun Devil's Blade is. I particularly enjoyed the scene where there are the two groups of soldiers, and they start to argue over who has greater claim and who has higher social standing, rather than going after who they're chasing, who will remain anonymous because we don't want to give you any spoilers, and just completely ruin everything. And I think, as someone who was a student of Victorian literature for so long, and also pretended to read French literature at university, I felt you really captured that sensibility so well. And I suppose the question was, you know, did you intentionally want to completely make fun of the whole social construct as it was in the era, or did you want to kind of play around with it a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of just came out in the writing, really. I mean, Julie is a character that's always going to bring that kind of construct into question, just because she's so talented, and is held back by that society. So the ridiculousness of it becomes very plain. I mean, for instance, you know, when she has certain sword fights that she has to lose to social superiors, and she has to work out a way to lose them without being killed. So yeah, she's always going to be someone who calls that into question. But she's kind of, I mean, again, I didn't just draw on history in this. I drew on things, you know, like Hammer films. There was an old Hammer film called Taste the Blood of Dracula I used to like when I was a kid, that kind of influenced this quite a lot. And for some reason, I'm not at all. I don't dislike Madonna, but I'm not a big Madonna fan, or whatever. But for some reason, that 80s sensibility of "this is my time now," that kind of sort of translated into Julie. She when she starts off, she sees herself, you know, there's a bit where she sees the aristocrat, and she immediately imagines herself not only marrying him, but him getting killed, her spending all his money, and marrying the next aristocrat afterwards who's richer. So this is her fantasy is all in material terms at the start. And you know, that changes throughout the book when she sort of, you know, without giving too many spoilers away, where she sort of finds a bit of sort of love and things like that. But yeah, her ambition is to become a duchess. That's her, you know, and she doesn't mind how she gets there at all. So yeah, she's not the hero of my previous book, Banners of Blood, Dowsabel. He's a revolutionary Cornish peasant, and his ambition is not to become a duke. His ambition is to tear down the whole system. Hers is definitely not that. She wants a system in place with her sitting on top of it, and that kind of, yeah, and it changes a little bit throughout the book, but not too much.
So just to clarify, so you started with Julie was, I'm guessing Julie may have been a starting point, and then from there you incorporated Madonna. And I mean, I suppose I'm just wondering, like, were there any other particular influences that we could never have guessed? Because it just sounds quite amazing, and I would just like to
As I say, I'm not a big fan of Madonna. I'm not a big fan of Kill Bill. I thought it was all right. But yeah, that kind of the revenge thing came in quite a lot, and yeah, I think I say Three Musketeers, and I think there's a certain bit of some of the in Julie. I think there's a bit of the Adamant, really, even another 80s star. You know, she's sort of she is the dandy highwayman sort of, you know. So yeah, it's good. It's in my previous books, I stuck really, really, really closely to the history, and I really researched the history, and I read 4 volumes of Sumption's History of the 100 Years' War and all this kind of thing. But this one, I just thought, nah, this is Oliver Reed and the Three Musketeers. This is what I want. I want a bit of that.
That is a good version of the Musketeers. And I suppose I felt at a certain point there was like a Musketeer flavour, but then when you said there were fights where she actually had to lose, I think I did quite like that part of it where, you know, not wanting to necessarily reference the BBC series of the Musketeers, but you do tend to think, you know, oh, they will win and triumph and everything will be okay because they're the Musketeers and yeah. Yes.
I only saw the start of that, actually. I didn't, I just didn't get the rest. I saw the first one, thought it was pretty good, but I for some reason didn't see the rest.
Well, there's obviously been lots of different versions, but obviously everyone knows Oliver Reed is the one that we need to go home with. Think on the same line of social standing with you, Rod. We do see a lot of recurring instances of those with and without throughout the whole series. Not wanting to particularly, it's not necessarily even just gender, but I think the fact that you, as you mentioned earlier, the economic setup of the Gaslit Empire and the other parts of the world are they're defined by how those different worlds work. And I suppose I was wondering for you, you know, what was it that by having Elizabeth as this main character made you want to explore those different worlds from all these different angles?
Yeah, so with the first trilogy, with the Bullet Catcher's Daughter, really we're within that Gaslit Empire. We're within that world where progress has been held back, and it has this complacent feeling that it, you know, the rulers believe that's it. They've arrived. This is the place they want to be. But of course, and they fondly imagine that there's just chaos that lies beyond, because as long as there's just chaos there, that's fine. They're not threatened. But pockets of order are starting to develop, and as you saw with the downing of the American frontier airship, that weapons are being developed out there that are sort of leaps forward in military technology, and so. With the second trilogy, when we leave the Gaslit Empire and we go out and we, you know, first of all we're on the high seas and we find a floating nation in the Sargasso, and in the second book in Newfoundland with a sort of kind of medieval Iceland feeling kind of
quite
society.
Wild West to me as well.
And then the final one is more of a sort of high court kings and courtiers drama in Oregon, and but with each of these I'm exploring opposites from the Gaslit Empire, and they're deliberately set up in opposition. So one is a aggressively matriarchal society, which kind of is opposite in a bad way of the male-dominated society within the Gaslit Empire, and then another, what you describe as Wild West. It feels that way because it's sort of set up in opposition to centralized control, and it's in some ways a sort of riffing off the sort of obsession with small government. You know, you cut down the legal system to absolutely the minimum that you can have, and of course what you discover is what remains is, of course, there are all kinds of laws and things that maybe people don't call laws, but they still restrict people. And then finally this kind of place where technology is advancing very fast. So in each case it's a setup of opposites, and and also with the final one, it's the opposite of the materialistic philosophy of the Gaslit Empire. It's a place that believes in magic. And so Elizabeth, who's brought up in a traveling conjuring show, finds herself in a position of potential strength because she can perform conjuring tricks, as does someone else who she discovers there. So yeah, it's very much that each one isn't, although they're kind of adventures and, you know, dramas in that way, they are in a sense, my interest in ideas is satisfied through them by taking these ideas and bashing them together and seeing what sparks I can get out of them, and so that was the motivation in that sense.
I've just realised that we haven't got very long left, and I have so many more questions that I obviously want to ask you. Rod, did you actually have to go and visit large military ships? Because the level of detail in this one is fascinating, because this is, I don't know if anyone else can see, but I'm guessing this is Mother.
The mothership.
On the front cover. Yeah, the mothership of the fleet.
The fleet, the North Atlantic.
But the way you describe it, it's huge. And yeah. So isn't this? You know, you're asking for all the secrets now, and I am. I want the secrets. Tell me.
Well, the secret is that you, as a reader, have done this extraordinary magical thing, which is take those few hints that I've given you, and you have constructed in great detail this world. And so this is the alchemy of writing and reading, isn't it? It's a collaborative project between writer and reader, and the trick is to give a few things that appear to be very precise details, out of which the reader will construct the whole thing in amazing high fidelity in their own minds. And so the things that were most useful to me. You think of research. Well, what did I, what sort of research? I would have loved to go and see the frigate Unicorn, which is docked in I think it's Dundee, up there, and but I couldn't travel up there. It was far too expensive, and I would have loved to do all these things. But the thing that really helped is things like finding a recording on YouTube of a ship, a tall ship, and just listening to the background sounds, just listening to the creaking and to the way it moves, and things like that. Watching endless videos of ships going through heavy seas, and looking at fog and the way fog behaves, and it's things like that you just have to put in an observation that's perfect. And the reader will build the rest of the world around it.
Yeah. Mark, did you do the same thing with your sword play? Did you pretend to be an expert, or can you actually duel?
I am a professional fencing coach.
You are? Yeah. I love it! Yes!
So whether I can duel is another question, because dueling is very different to fencing. Because dueling is when you kill people, and fencing, I just get a little bit on my arm.
I was not aware that I had assumed that I basically said, "Have you killed someone?" I apologise for anyone if I have.
Well, you don't necessarily kill people at dueling, but you might, even if sometimes duels were fought to blood. but people are charging at each other with large lengths of steel, pointy steel, and things go wrong. And not people are, you know, some people are going to duels drunk, enraged, you know, in all sorts of states. I mean, I think if I was going in one, I'd need, you know, I don't drink, but I'd need a good quarter of a bottle of whiskey to get me out there, I think. So yeah, I've never fought a duel. Or I have fought with few fights, particularly as a kid, with mask off and just a recreation sword. But that's not a duel. You're trying not to hurt each other there, really, or just to hit each other in the chest. But yeah, the fencing is probably the most accurate thing about it. But what you will see again in a duel, presuming both people in the duel are in the right mind, which they might not be, because there were some lunatics who used to do these things, and as I say, drunkards, is an excess of caution. That's because I'm not going to hit you until I've got your sword. Thank you, that's mine now. Well, like that. I'm not going to take a risk like I might at sports fencing, because you can just stick your arm out, I kill you, you kill me. That's no good to me. So anyway, yeah. So yeah, the fencing is quite accurate, and I've read, yeah, for being a kid, thousands of fencing treatises. So yeah.
So what you figure out here is that I'm a fraud, and that Mark's the genuine article here.
Well, not so much. You know, as I say, dueling is very different. There was a very famous 20th century fencer called Alder who won everything and was noted as the greatest stylist fencing has ever produced. Beautiful to watch. And he fought a real duel because he's a mad Italian who fell out with a mad Hungarian. And in fencing, you very quickly find that mad Hungarian is a tautology, because my first coach was Hungarian, and absolutely crazy guy to learn from, but brilliant. But all the stereotypes you'd expect. He just take your sword. You not deserve this. Get it away. Like that kind of thing. Throw it across the floor, sort of thing. And he'd do things like, I know one guy who came to see him. 2 years, he just told, I know we can swear, I'm not going to bother, but 2 years he told him to go away, and he kept coming back for 2 years, every time. And then after 2 years, he said good at one point, and the whole room, the whole cell just stopped and looked. Yeah, Aldo Nardi, when he fought a duel, looked rubbish. And people said, why did you look so bad? You know, you look like a beginner. And he said, it's really different with the sharp one. So,
well, I don't know about you, but I've learned that dueling means that you're definitely going to kill someone. So.
No, definitely no, because Mark Twain in the 19th century recommended dueling is good for your health. Because what a lot of people used to do was turn up. Yes, I'm in a duel this morning. Yes, I'm in a duel. You know, I'm a very brave person. I'm in a duel, and you go along, you kind of wave your sword at the other guy. I'm satisfied. I go home and tell the story. You know, we don't actually bother coming together at any point. But Julie, of course, it's actually technically true in the story. Julie could not be prosecuted under the duel. Louis XIV expressly forbid dueling. But Julie couldn't be prosecuted under that law because she was a woman, and the law was written for men. So she was let off time and time again because there's no law, it wasn't illegal for women to duel.
She found a loophole. That's what she did.
Loopholes in other people.
Found a loophole and then some. There we go. This has been great. I have so many more questions, but unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time slot. I don't know how else to describe it because I feel like I can't end of our event. Thank you so much for joining me and for coming to chat about the Devil's Blade and the Map of Unknown Things, with The Fugitive and Vanishing Man being the one that's out this year. Oregon, I'm just referencing that because Rod has his very lovely Oregon background. If you enjoy swashbuckling adventure, very atmospheric and smelly Paris, and some brilliant spy, big fan of Elizabeth, then do check out these books and have a look and support your local bookstore, which will probably be sending books to you. To be honest, I live in Bristol, and I believe I can still order books from Edinburgh if I wanted to support Golden Hair. You know, it's a really brilliant system. But thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rod, and everyone at home. If you have a drink with you or a cup of tea, you know, raise it to our authors, and I hope you're enjoying Cymera this weekend. Finish my water. Thank you so much. This has been really lovely, and I hope you have some time to check out some of the other events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.